Hello friends, welcome to FDR India. Let's talk about One Nation, One Election with Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan today. Hello sir.
Hello Ankit.
So the Union Cabinet as we speak has given approval for introduction of a bill approving One Nation, One Election, simultaneous elections that is set to be introduced in the upcoming parliamentary session. So has the time come for simultaneous elections now?
Not at all. I think it's not a very well thought out move, well-meaning move, because there are many people in the country, in the political spectrum, in society, in media, who genuinely are vexed with too many elections. There is a feeling that we are running from campaign to campaign on a continuing basis, forgetting governance and administration. And they're not entirely wrong. Part of the reason is not elections. Part of the reason is we have over-centralized powers in the hands of the chief ministers in states and the prime minister in the union. And we have completely innervated the third tier of government. So instead of addressing the real challenges, to somehow think that if only you can have elections together for all these tiers of government, everything will be okay, is not a very good idea, but very tempting idea. Because many middle classes in India are very tired of democratic campaigns and elections all the time. But it has three serious problems. Problem one, it will not happen. Because this requires a constitutional amendment with 2/3 majority in both houses of parliament. And in my judgment, it also requires the consent of the majority of the states. That may not be a big issue, consent of the majority of states, but 2/3 majority in both houses of parliament, a special majority, is simply not on the cards. Even for a very genuinely worthy project, which is necessary for the country immediately, right now the conditions are not very conducive to build everybody, a consensus bringing everybody together. And a contentious issue like this, questionable issue like this, it is impossible to bring all parties together. Already the opposition very vehemently said they will not support it, they will oppose it. So A, it will not happen because it's a constitutional amendment that is required. B, if it happens, it's not sustainable because our model is patterned after British model, Westminster model.
Right.
In Westminster model, the head of the government at any point of time can go to the sovereign, in our case the president or the governor, in their case the monarch, asking for dissolution of the house. Several times to overcome a political impasse, they had to go for repeated dissolutions. Between 1909 and 1911, 3 times the parliament was dissolved because the people's budget was rejected by the upper house at the time, the House of Lords. That led to far-reaching parliamentary reform. So it's the very nature of things in a Westminster model. And so is the case with India. Whether national level or state level, the elected head of the government, with commanding majority in the House, has the right to go to the head of the government, constitutional head of state, and ask for dissolution. Therefore, whatever you do will be undone. 3, it actually is going to set back our democracy, in my view, in a very peculiar way. Even now, most people don't know what they're voting for. They know they're voting for somebody or the other. They have no clue which tier they're voting for. They have no clue what the federal government does, what the state government does, what a local government does. Most of the vote in India, about 85% of the vote, is based on what the people want at the state level. I see the government in the state, I like the government, I vote for that government or that party across the board for the parliament, for the state assembly, for the municipalities, for the panchayats, etc. I don't like the government in the state, I oppose that party at every level. Now that is actually not very conducive to a healthy democracy. A democracy works when people know exactly what they're voting for. They understand which tier performs what functions. If they don't understand that, if we vote in a very blind way, either out of rage or out of some kind of affection for a party or an individual, then democracy is not matured. This kind of a simultaneous election, instead of making it more mature, if anything makes it even less mature. So it's not going to serve the purpose of improving the content of our democracy. And finally, it may not even help a federal government or a party in federal government, the power in federal government, because when the people's response in the election is for or against the government in the state, What happens now is, take Karnataka. When Karnataka BJP government was unpopular, people voted them out. Congress came to power in Karnataka. Within 1 year, when the national election is held, the same people of Karnataka voted for the national government. So that means your disappointment or anger against the state will not reflect on the parliamentary verdict. You are making a judgment differently, and your anger is now dissipated because you've already exercised your judgment and you throw out the party in power. Therefore, national election, the same party stands a chance depending on the performance at the national level. Whereas if you combine the election, your anger against the government in the state will also reflect on that party at the national level. So it doesn't even serve their political purpose. Finally, I understand that President Kovind's proposal or the committee's proposal is, once such a constitutional amendment actually comes in place and we have simultaneous election, if let us say in a state a midterm poll is necessitated because you have to go back to the constitutional head of state and ask for dissolution, then that house will have the tenure only for the remainder of the term. It's a very bad idea in a democracy. You cannot ab initio truncate the term. We have a similar practice in the panchayats and municipalities under the 73rd, 74th amendments. Even that was not politically very sound, but there was some sound reasoning behind it. The reasoning being, whenever a party comes to power at the state level, if they have local governments mostly held by another party, erstwhile in power, then the temptation of the new ruling party in the states is to dissolve all the local governments en masse. It is to remove that incentive, they try to bring in that provision. So in order to minimize the incentive for that kind of a precipitous exercise of power, dissolving all the local governments simultaneously, they said, even if you do dissolve, the next election verdict will apply only for the remainder of the term. So the incentive for you is not there, because if you already finished 2.5 years, there's only another 2.5 years left. What's the point of dissolving and electing them for 2.5 years? The incentive is not there. So at least there is that reasoning. Now for the assembly to invoke the same principle is a very bad idea, because a democracy functions well only when there is some kind of a balance between the long-term interests of the community, the society, and the short-term political compulsions. If you're forcing a state to go to polls again and again and again, if you truncate the term, then there is no long-term left. Already the central challenge of India is, how do you reconcile the long-term interests of the country with the short-term political needs? If you now institutionalize it in our democracy, in terms of electoral practice of truncating the term of the assembly, that will be death knell for democracy, in the sense that the parties already are looking for short-term freebies to somehow get the voters' favor at the cost of the long-term economic growth. Now tomorrow you're institutionalizing it because the term itself is going to be truncated. There's no long-term left at all. It's a very bad idea. So on all counts, I don't think it's very well thought out. In any case, right now I don't see a parliamentary majority, special majority that is required for a constitutional amendment. So it will be a non-starter.
So like you also mentioned in your opening comments that there is a feeling that governance takes the backseat when there are continuous elections. So if that is a real challenge, lack of governance, what is the solution if not one nation, one election?
See, once we embrace democracy, getting vexed with elections is not a very smart idea. Democracy imposes a certain cost. It imposes a certain burden. Nobody is saying democracy is efficient. If you want efficient government, probably the best one is what Plato argued for. If a philosopher is a king, if a king is a philosopher, then give him all the powers because you trust the philosopher. He has no personal axe to grind. And make him a dictator, you are safe. Why did Plato change his tune? He later came out with another book, much more important, though much less talked about, called The Laws. Why? Because he realized that the philosopher is unlikely to be a king in a democracy. And even if a philosopher by accident becomes a king, it's unlikely that he'll remain a philosopher while in power. Because power has a way of completely eroding the personality, eroding the soul. Abuse becomes endemic in power. Therefore, it's very difficult for a person to remain philosophical and detached once you actually taste power. And even if that person really stays above the fray, and tries to be philosophical, ultimately governance is about people following, about your word counting. Merely because somebody is there in position, but he is not respected or his orders are not obeyed, it doesn't really matter. You cannot govern. So democracy inherently has some amount of inefficiency built into that. We must design mechanisms to minimize that inefficiency rather than to overcome democracy or be vexed with democracy or be angry with democracy in the electoral process. Because remember, elections are a way of educating ourselves, having a massive public debate on grand issues and persuading us over time from experience, from evidence and from logic, persuading us as to what is the best course for us and for our children. Now the way to do it is, as far as possible, separate these three tiers of government. Let there be greater clarity in the minds of the people as to what the union does, what the state does, what the local government does. In India, there's too much confusion about what the local government does, what union does, what state does. And if you separate them clearly, and you make power as local as possible, and if you make that local power as accountable as possible, then this inouï of democracy and too many elections will give way to the real bread and butter needs of the people. Take a country like China. Unquestionably, it's an avowed, self-avowed authoritarian dictatorship, right? It's a single party government. There's no secrecy in that. That is constitutionally mandated in that country. Despite that, local governments in China are far more powerful and far more effective than they are in India. You cannot even dream of that. When our team does a study as to how much money is spent at what level, only about 15 to 17% of the total government expenditure is at the federal level. They don't call it federal, they call it central in Beijing. At that level, only about 1/6 of the expenditure is at the national level. Maybe another 15% or so, 15-18% is at the state level or provincial level, as they call it. The rest of 65% plus, almost 65 to 70%, is spent in the local tiers. It is a prefecture, it is the county, it is whatever name you call it. There are various names, like our district, our town, our municipality, municipal corporation, or our mandal or block or whatever. All these put together, they constitute about 65 to 68% of the expenditure. And they have built instruments of accountability locally. So people understand what is happening with their money. They can assert. You can hold the system to account. We actually get delivery of services. So how do you design a system where people understand clearly the link between the vote that I cast and the consequences that follow, the taxes that I pay and the services that I receive? That is the way to rescue democracy from this disappointment and anyway. Not somehow bunching everything, confusing further. Some vote comes and God knows what happens subsequently. Already there is far too much confusion. For a local issue like street lighting, oftentimes people call an MP. For water supply in your household, they call up the MP or MLA. These are local government functions. So it's the way you design it to make sure that in the people's minds the accountability is very clear. People know exactly who does what. So in other words, to make our democracy work better, we must go exactly in the opposite direction. Because we have no clue in this country, in most cases, 85% of the voters have no clue what does an MLA do, what does an MP do, what does the local government do. They confuse everything.
So, but immediately after independence, we had a couple of simultaneous elections to the union and the states for multiple, I think for 3-4 general elections we had that. How did that work and how did that change?
See, I'm not saying simultaneous elections are fundamentally bad. I'm saying forcing them is fundamentally bad. It only shows, for instance, in that election, because there was a national mood, early post-independence era, the values of freedom struggle, men and women who participated in freedom struggle, who sacrificed a great deal, whose integrity is beyond doubt, and the broad national trajectory is well settled and there's no doubt about it. Things worked because we were also in the national building phase. We did not even build local governments. Remember, only in 1958 in Rajasthan local governments came. 15 and Andhra Pradesh followed suit. We did not even give that experiment adequate time. Only in some states we allowed it to continue. Most states didn't even bother. So it's a national building stage. At that stage, it did not matter much because of the trust and the faith in which the governments are held. But now increasingly, there is no reason to trust a person just because they happen to be in politics, right? If anything, there's enormous mistrust, enormous money in politics, illegitimate money, unaccountability, and failed delivery. Now, in the face of this, our single-minded obsession should be how do you make the government deliver? And deliver in a manner that people can appreciate. And if they don't deliver, that also people understand. And therefore, they use the vote as a very refined instrument to improve things. That's what democracy and vote are about. If instead it's all about somehow getting the mandate and being there, not using it as a refined instrument to measure the performance and give you a verdict on that, then democracy fails. It becomes the preserve of those power brokers who want to be in power at any cost. That's already happening in the country. 30 crores, 40 crores being spent by an assembly candidate in many southern states excepting Kerala. What does it show? Many other states following suit, enormous expenditure incurred. What does it show? It's nothing to do with the people. It's all about who is in power. And for that, they're willing to do anything, whatever it takes. Astronomical sums are being spent. So, if anything, our trajectory should be in the opposite direction. Further decentralize power, clarify in the people's minds, use vote as a very refined instrument to improve the content of democracy, bring about genuine electoral reform like, do we require to change electoral system? Change. So that the first past the post system impulses. One more vote I win. And therefore, I put in crores and crores of rupees to buy the vote. That will give way to more refined mechanism. So there's a lot of need for change. Status quo is not an option. But this is the wrong kind of change.
So does it have any effect on regional parties if there is indeed simultaneous elections?
What will happen is, it will actually strengthen the regional parties. As I explained to you, for instance, take in a state like Telangana, now Karnataka or some other state, even if a party other than the national party in power at the national level, other than that party, if another regional party is in power, let's say in a state, if the elections are separated, Assembly and Loksatta, what is happening is while 80-85% people vote according to their judgment of the government in the state, there are 15-20% people who in a separate election are able to see the difference between these two leaderships. They may not always understand the difference in the functional level. What the union government does under schedule, 7th schedule, what the state government does in the 7th schedule, list 2, they may not understand. But they understand enough to know in their own mind whether this government is performing well or not at the state level, separately at the national level. So at least 10-15% voters are willing to exercise their judgment on the basis of the union's performance in Lok Sabha election and the state's performance in the assembly election, because they are separate. If they are combined, the chances of that further diminish. Only 4-5%, the more discerning people will vote. You take United States, all elections are simultaneous. There is no problem there. Why? Because people are attuned to it. They fully understand what is the local government function, what is the state function, what is the federal function. So in the same election, however polarizing the election is, like Donald Trump always makes elections very polarizing. They may vote for or against Donald Trump at the top of the ticket. But if you go to the other positions, state level positions, or senators at the union level, federal level, or the members of the House of Representatives, the congressmen at the federal level, or the state senators, or the local government mayors or others, you'll see complete difference. I may vote for Donald Trump there, but I may vote for another party here, another party here, another party here, depending on the tier. There are 20-30 people elected on the same day, in the same ballot. And the voting is never blind. Voting is never blind. Whereas in India, sitting here, I can tell you categorically, 85% people vote the same way for the Lok Sabha and the State Assembly.
So in that case, sir, will it not benefit the current ruling party at the national level?
No, because the election result is largely a reflection of the assessment of the voters and the state government's performance. Because for the people of India, the real government that's affecting their lives is the state government. Remember, most of the functions are in the state. Numbers may appear to be in Delhi, but everything that affects your life, your education, your healthcare, your water supply, your sewerage, your stormwater drainage, your roads, your traffic management, your courts, your police, your parks, anything, everything that matters is at the state level. So intuitively people understand that. That's why the state assembly constituency is now the theatre of politics, not the parliamentary constituency. Ask any seasoned parliamentarian, they know the real politics is in the assembly. Parliament is derivative. So given that, it is the state that dominates thinking. So if your party, let us say, Mr. Narendra Modi's party in the state is unpopular, that unpopularity will spread to the national vote also. Not the other way around.
Not the other way around.
Not the other way around. Whereas if you desegregate, if you segregate, if you separate these two, then they focus on this here, and some significant number, though not all people, they will think differently about the national election.
So does it also have a bearing on the cost of expenditure, like illegitimate money?
Certainly, elections do cost money. Therefore, if you hold simultaneously, you will save some money, there's no doubt. But there's a very small gain compared to the many losses. In a democracy, you can't say, I want democracy, and then I want efficiency, and then I want economy. And because of economy, even if people don't understand what is happening, it doesn't matter. We'll somehow have some kind of a vote and we'll go through the motions. It's not a smart logic.
Okay. So then you in the opening comments, you also mentioned that it is not feasible practically. You said that they don't have the constitutional,
it requires clearly a constitutional amendment because the constitution envisages these two to start with, and later local governments are separate tiers. They did not make one election contingent upon another election. Now you are basically making them contingent upon another election. It's a major constitutional amendment. Where are the numbers now?
So if they don't have the numbers, then why this now?
It's a good question you should ask of the people in government. I really don't understand. I don't know the logic. I don't even see any political benefit by raising this issue.
Right. So, like you said, sir, on the one hand, we all like our democracy, and we want democracy. We don't want elections. So, where is this dealing coming? Where is this strangeness coming from?
There's a good reason for that. The vote is now dealing from the public good. I'm making this point with enormous pain. While our democracy is robust and real, increasingly it is losing, public attention, because the vote is not in the people's mind making a significant difference to their lives. Because of centralization of power. Our taxes are dealing from our services. No matter whom I vote for, nothing seems to change adequately. So people are vexed. That's why, on the one hand, we celebrate democracy with great gusto in a festive atmosphere. No other country celebrates it as a festival like we do. On the other hand, the day after the election, we're dissatisfied, angry. We don't want our elected politicians to exercise power. We want courts to exercise power. We want somebody else to be in power. Anybody but elected politicians. This is largely because of the dealing between the vote and the consequences in the people's mind, between the taxes and services. And authority is completely dealing from accountability. We all feel that something is going wrong in almost every sector, but we don't know who is guilty. So we are perpetually angry, and we want a high court or Supreme Court to settle the issue. That's an absurd way of running a country. The court has its job cut out. Let them do their job well. The courts are not here to govern the country, to allocate the resources, or to execute the projects. Yesterday, I saw in newspapers, I don't know how accurate it is, the Supreme Court has given a direction that all demolitions henceforth shall be stopped. They will not do any demolition without the Supreme Court's prior approval. If it is true, what an absurd order in a country of 1.4 billion people. A country in which there are hundreds of thousands of constituent local government units. There are millions of functionaries who have to discharge their functions under the law of the land. Sometimes, to remove an encroachment of a road or, let's say, a water stream, obstruction to a water stream, you have to act immediately. If the Supreme Court of India gives a blanket decision, don't do anything without our consent, what an absurd thing. Only in India can this happen. We have a dysfunctional system in the extreme. We have to see how best to make it more functional, harmonious, effective, democratic, accountable, transparent. Not confuse everything by clubbing everything.
So will freebies reduce their importance in the one nation, one election? Will freebies reduce?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know because you have seen the national election.
Right.
The kind of short-term welfareism for the individual gain that was offered was phenomenal. You see every state election. It's phenomenal again. If at least these elections are broadly separate and people perceive them to be somewhat different, a wise and enlightened leadership at the national level with a long-term perspective can, to at least some extent, bring a better balance between short-term individual welfare and long-term collective good. And in a way, I actually believe that the current national leadership is attempting that at the national level. It's a Herculean task to try and do what they're doing, to maintain fiscal discipline, to focus on the long-term growth through infrastructure and rational economic policies to pursue growth and investment and job creation, even as you satisfy the short-term aspirations of the people with individual welfare, because that is required in a poor country. So in my judgment, a very heroic effort is being made. But if you combine everything, in the onslaught of tremendous temptations offered by a variety of political parties, focusing entirely on the short-term individual welfare measures at the cost of the long-term public good and economic growth impulse, the danger also could be that the national financial management, fiscal management also will completely go down under. So I'm not sure that simultaneous election is the best way to bring in fiscal discipline. For that, separately, we have to have strong fiscal rules around which there's a consensus, but independently operated so that it's not politicized. Now we have an independent mechanism by which the rules are properly implemented, rather than a political branch of the government deciding. Then, even if they do the right thing, you say, because you don't like the party in a particular state, you're going against them. You hear all the time in this country. So that requires a different approach. I don't think there is a solution through this kind of a simultaneous election for the fiscal management of India, the problems of fiscal management of India.
Right. Thank you, sir, for sharing your perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you.